Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler, the tech editor of the Irish and Sunday Independent. And before I introduce this week's guest, I want to tell you what we're talking about. We're talking about the giant Facebook leak of millions of mobile phone numbers. So earlier this month, you'll remember, there was a database that was shared around the internet with literally millions of mobile numbers matched against your name, 530 million in all, including at least 1.3 million here in Ireland. And I went through that list and I was able to find the names and mobiles of judges, Gardaí, prison officers, women's refuge managers, people in very, very sensitive positions. And there's a couple of threats from that. There's obviously the threat of stalking and harassment, but there's also a technical threat of phishing, of spam, those dodgy calls that you sometimes get from Sierra Leone that you do or you don't take. And there has been some outrage about it, but Facebook basically says it's old news. It says it was public information. It says that this was a couple of years ago and that it was scraped by a few unscrupulous individuals. The Data Protection Commissioner doesn't particularly like that excuse and it's investigating, but Digital Rights Ireland, which has quite a long history of taking on big tech causes. It scored that big victory in the European Court of Justice a few years ago with with data retention laws. You'll remember it's taking a mass action on this case here in Ireland. In other words, it's gathering up thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, to sue Facebook for the leak of all of those millions of mobile numbers. So I'm joined by not somebody from Facebook because they declined to come on the podcast this time, but I'm joined by the Director of Digital Rights Ireland, Anton O'Loughlin. You're welcome to the podcast. And also by Kerry Lenning, who's an Associate in Data Protection and Information Security at Castlebridge. You're both welcome to the podcast.
Okay. Happy to be here.
Brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, Anton, can I just ask you an idiot question first? How is what happened with the Facebook mobile numbers different to a phone book with everybody's name and phone number in it?
Okay. And that's a really good question of understanding how we're moving from one era to the other. And really what the difference is that this is much more indexed. There's much more ways you can use it than a phone book. You know, you can search it in reverse. You can go from name to number, and you can go from Facebook ID to number. There's a lot more you can do in this era with a set of data than you could before. Another difference with the traditional phone book situation was that in the old days when phone books were popular, every call cost money. It was pretty expensive if you wanted to go and phone everybody in the phone book or some measure like that. You had to be pretty targeted about it. Whereas with this, because of email and because of cheap phone calls, people can just exploit this in loads of different ways and on a mass scale. Plus, people are depending on things like phone numbers much more. For example, the issue of two-factor authentication. You know, the use of the phone number is part of the two-factor authentication. And although the number in itself, it's not enough to allow somebody to break the two-factor authentication, it could well be a big help for them in doing so.
And I think you've guided that in some of the documents you've put out around this, that in other comparable cases, you reckon that somewhere between €300 and €12,000 in damages is something that could occur in this case if it's successful.
That's it. It's very hard to say because we're very early on in the world of precedents, and we are very early in. This is only starting the idea of the damages for data protection under the GDPR. And the other side is we still don't know what damage is actually going to be done by this, because we really haven't seen a leak in the world like this before. I mean, this stuff has been available for sale to people in the know, it would seem, for months and months. But now anyone who can download it off the internet can get it and start to use it for scams, for phoning you up and trying to get your PPS number off for whatever other purpose that they have.
Yeah. Now, as I said, I did invite somebody from Facebook onto the podcast on this issue. They declined on this occasion. I will read out what they said in terms of their statement. In relation to Digital Rights Ireland's case, they said, "We understand people's concerns, which is why we continue to strengthen our systems to make scraping from Facebook without our permission more difficult and go after people behind it. As LinkedIn and Clubhouse incidents have also shown, No company can completely eliminate scraping or prevent data sets like these from appearing. That's why we devote substantial resources to combat it, and will continue to build out our capabilities to stay ahead of this challenge. By the way, on the Data Protection Commission inquiry, they say, we are cooperating fully with the Irish Data Protection Commission in its inquiry, which relates to features that make it easier for people to find and connect with friends and on our services. These features are common to many apps, and we look forward to explaining them and the protections we have put in place. Kerry, there is one thing about that. Actually, all of Facebook responses to this, to me, have seemed slightly dismissive. When your official response to a Data Protection Commission of Ireland, your main regulator, is that you look forward to explaining to them why they're wrong and you're right. To me, that's an odd tone.
I think that's actually an understatement, to be honest. I think, but it kind of tracks a little bit of Facebook's pattern and practice. So I should disclose, I used to work for Facebook, and I actually worked in the kind of risk and compliance team where we had to deal with this sort of a thing. And I was deeply frustrated because this isn't new. And, there's documented evidence where Facebook has declared that these kind of incidents aren't breaches, and they're scraping or they're leaking or it's some other kind of a thing. And so they feel like they don't have to report this. And, under the breach laws in the GDPR. And I think that it signals, something that goes back to Facebook's kind of early intentions and what Mark Zuckerberg has said in the past, which is he just thinks that privacy isn't a thing. So no matter, what they say in terms of their policy and how much they claim that they care about privacy, this is just indicative of their behavior and their choices in terms of why they think this stuff isn't private data.
Well, just on the specifics of this case, I think what Facebook is arguing is that this was data that was scraped, they say, prior to 2019. We know the GDPR came into effect here in 2018, but they're saying essentially, first of all, that this was public information. A lot of what their defense is about hinges on this definition of public. In other words, if we were using Facebook and we wanted to see whether other people we knew were also using Facebook, one of Facebook's pop-ups at the time would say, can we go into your contacts book on your phone to see whether any of the people in your contacts book might also be on Facebook? And
right.
Probably a lot of us said, yeah, okay. That then qualified that your mobile number in Facebook's eyes as being public. Therefore, it's now public information. And if anybody has the smarts to go and come up with a tool that can scour the web and scrape that public information and compile a giant list of everybody's mobile number, then that's just a downside of the way things are.
Right. I think it's kind of interesting. So their contacts bug, which occurred in, I believe, 2018, if I remember correctly, was something that they ultimately had to fess up to, and I believe they had to, fix. And it was something that they got in trouble with, to be honest, with the FTC in the United States. And so Facebook kind of declares these things as public, but I don't think that they have the legal justification to do so. In this particular case, first off, I can attest that the data that they had, I actually looked through a lot of the records, particularly in the US and Ireland. They have data going to 2019. Now, there's the way that the data is structured is it shows, the name and the Facebook ID and birth date, which generally most people I don't think consider public.
You know what? I looked my own up, of course. And I didn't see a birth date with mine.
Yeah, so some records definitely had it, and then others didn't. Some records had relationship status, some records had employment information. It really just
that was the bit that creeped me out a little bit, because whatever about, Adrian Weckler, here's your mobile number, here's your general location, Dublin. Okay. Not thrilled about that, but there's probably only a limited amount of damage you can do with that. Adrian Weckler, prison officer.
Right.
his mobile number. Now, all of a sudden, if there's a beef on the inside in prison and associates of the person who has it in for me as a prison officer want a way of intimidating me, it's a little bit easier to do that.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. You know, in my personal case, because I was a former employee, I had to provide my cell phone number under the auspices that this was for two-factor authentication. And, you know, Facebook got in trouble for using that two-factor authentication phone number for other purposes, for the contact ID, for other things. And so it was deeply troubling to me because in my case, you know, I left Facebook in 2019. I know I deleted my account in 2019. I deleted my account in January, and I found out that even in even in June of 2019, my record was still there. So not only were they not deleting information, but I think that they were actually harvesting information up until June 5th in 2019.
They must love you. You're one of those problematic ex-employees who's coming back to get them.
Yeah, I still got to be careful because you sign things, but yeah, at the same time, you know, it's frustrating because when I went in, this was during the period of time when Facebook said that they cared about privacy. You know, there's many things that they announced.
They always say that. And look, to be fair, I really don't mean this to be one big ganging up on Facebook, even though the facts in front of us do give some ammunition to that. I did invite them on. Anton, I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, but there is a place where you can go and look up whether your number has been involved in this if you don't have the document. That's haveibeenpwned.com. It's now the default online source to see whether you've been involved in a data breach. haveibeenpwned.com. And you can put in your mobile number there or an email address for other data breaches. But the creator of that site, Troy Hunt, who's one of the most famous online security guys now, he made a video that you actually pointed out, criticizing this particular action from Digital Rights Ireland. He called it ambulance chasing. He said, I'm quoting here, "I feel really uncomfortable with class actions like this." He says, "Everyone in the Facebook breach wants as much money out of Facebook as they can get. The focus is damages, not correcting behavior."
Yeah, first, I don't know if he actually said we were ambulance chasing, but he said that generally that the idea of suing was ambulance chasing, just to be fair to him. And he is... So
he likened it to ambulance chasing.
He certainly put it in the same bracket as ambulance chasing. So what it is here is the objective is not to get a load of money from Digital Rights Ireland's perspective. That is not our primary objective. Our primary objective is to change practices and improve behavior in the industry overall over a period of time. We think that the existing measures, the regulatory measures, you know, the work of the regulator, the data protection authorities, and the government and so on, that's not enough, and they don't have enough power to really make the difference because of the structure of the industry, and that it needs people to take private damages actions to send the message that it is not going to be economic to have as a business model that you will breach privacy, or to not take care that you do not, or to fail to take care that you do not breach privacy. In much the same way that it is not acceptable as a business model to breach safety regulations. If you're in the food industry or if you make equipment that has safety implications, you have to take all the precautions around the provision of that product or service to make sure that people don't get hurt, or that the damage or the hurt or the injury is absolutely minimized.
Yeah, because the contact importer that we mentioned and the process, the logic behind Facebook's argument that this information was public according to a certain set of technical criteria, you can kind of see how, and I've heard people inside the industry and technically literate people agree with the basic concept that information is public once you allow a contact importer to go check your phone's contact book. But I suspect most people, if you ask them, did you think by giving Facebook permission to do that, that would make your mobile number effectively public for anyone? I don't think they would have understood that.
No, they wouldn't have understood that. And if you see some of the language in some of the Facebook statements, they say that it's for people to do lookups. It's for people to find out if anyone they know is on Facebook and to connect up with them or whatever. This really isn't people. When a scraper, a giant robot is going on, and it must have made billions of queries because it seems to have gone through the whole number plan of the entire world to try and grab all this data. That's not people. That's machinery. That's dedicated exploitation. This isn't just somebody disgruntled trying to get the details, Facebook details of one person. Or trying to make contact with that person. It's not that. This is just the scale of this is completely unprecedented. 500 million, a well-used fraction of the world's population. It's just we've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, and the pain of it, I think, might be that you will start seeing more dodgy calls from numbers you don't recognize or phishing attempts. I think that's definitely going to go up. But just on terms of what might accrue from this, if I join this, because I think you have a website, I think it's facebookbreach.eu, which I think goes back to Digital Rights
Ireland,
website. Supposing I get €1,000, supposing the court case says, okay, we're going to give anyone affected from this, say, €1,000 each. That's nothing to Facebook, right?
Yeah, say if we have 10,000 people in our case, so that's 10 million euros, and so what? The problem is, from Facebook's point of view, is the precedent has been set then. And all the other people who were affected who weren't in our suit can, on the basis of our win, can go in after and seek similar compensation. So in Europe, you certainly could be looking at tens of millions of people would follow our route and seek similar levels of damages.
Well, sure. I mean, surely they would. I mean, if it was €1,000 each, for example, if you set the precedent, and if I'm not one of those people who joined your action initially, if I see that there is now precedent for awarding me €1,000 from my number being up there, and I know my number is up there, why wouldn't I go forward and claim that? Why wouldn't I join some other man's action?
Yeah, because it's very straightforward. I mean, Facebook are just then it's just a matter of Facebook are going to have to settle with you because they go back to court. They're definitely going to lose. So we're now going quickly into the damages in the billions of euro region. We're talking about a far higher level of damages, and it's not just the prospect of that damages in relation to this case. It's a damages in relation to anything else Facebook may have done, which violates privacy. And this isn't just an impact for Facebook. This is an impact for all tech companies.
Yeah, I know that there are going to be people listening to this whose cynicism radars will be going out in the back of their head, and they'll be thinking, for whichever lawyers get involved in this, it could be a very, very nice payday.
Well, I mean, if we have to see how it comes off, it's still a lot of risk and a lot of work to doing something like this. But clearly, and this is the pattern that's happened in other countries, is that the legal process and the legal systems is what often drives up standards. It causes improvement. It makes companies think this isn't something we can just carry, that we can just take a chance on, we can pay the fines on as we go along. We have to take this seriously. We have to move on.
Yeah.
Is it nice that it has to be done through this legal process? It's not really. It would be great if there were other ways of doing it that would be more efficient, that wouldn't be so dependent on civil society to go out and actually lead up the whole thing and take all the risk and depend on individual donations from lots of people. But this is the reality of the world that we're in.
And just, we should clarify that in signing up for this now with Digital Rights Ireland, I think you said you've about 7,000 people that have signed up so far. But in signing up to do that, at this point, you can just sign up as an expression of interest. But if you do proceed with Digital Rights Ireland through the case, you will actually have to pay.
We'll ask people to make a contribution to the case, so it'll be far less than what it would cost if you were to take this case on your own. But it won't be zero.
Right. So
it'll be, I would say, it'll be somewhere between 50 and 100 euros. Yeah. It'll be that range of costs. Yeah. So in terms of what our costs are going to be, is there's a lot of work to bring a case like this to the court. a barrister, counsel and solicitors, they can't do other work while they're doing this work. And it's not something they can really do without there being costs and expenses run up. And the reality as well is that there's going to be appeals. It will go to other courts. If you're looking for a quick payout, if you're looking to make money fast, to be honest, this is probably not the case for you. It will take time for this to actually happen. But the reason to be in this case is because it's a way of sending a signal to the tech companies in general, but Facebook in particular, that personal data has to be handled with great care. And if it isn't handled with great care, that there are real consequences.
Kerry, I mentioned that the DPC here in Ireland is looking at this now. She was also before an Oireachtas committee during the week, where she was heavily criticised by a number of contributors, including Max Schrems, Dr. Johnny Ryan, Fred Logue, solicitors as well. In an ideal world, should she be taking the lead on this? They are investigating this, to be fair, but is DRI's action a sign that maybe we're getting fed up waiting for stuff to happen around stuff like this?
Oh, I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think that's precisely why, the other supervisory authorities and other folks have been complaining so loudly. The regulator has, and I understand the constraints that, the DPC is under. I understand their resourcing and things like that. But they've initiated, I think, something like 10 different investigations, because I was tracking this as part of a timeline process for Digital Rights Ireland. And of those, nothing really has happened. Facebook has accounted, at least WhatsApp has accounted for some potential fine. So they've already budgeted away, but nothing has occurred. She hasn't made, I should say, Helen Dixon hasn't made a
just to
decision.
clarify that, as far as we know, over the last few months, the DPC has indicated that there is a decision on WhatsApp coming soon. It's very likely that will be a fine. All of the my understanding is that there will be a fine attached to that, and it'll be a lot more than the Twitter fine. The Twitter fine, I can't remember what it was. It was a couple of €100,000 before Christmas. It was kind of trivial. Now, that was a very different case as well. I mean, it wasn't on the same level as some of the Facebook investigations. I think there are 13 Facebook-related investigations involving either Instagram, WhatsApp, or Facebook. But I think those fines will be coming. Now, they may not get to the $5 billion levels that in the US that Facebook attracted 2 years ago. But I'd be surprised if it wasn't a couple €100 million. We saw in Facebook's own accounts in the last 6 months, they have budgeted for, both Facebook and WhatsApp separately have budgeted for fines in Ireland largely, extending into a couple of €100 million.
Right. But I mean, the DPC has been bringing action since Cambridge Analytica, and so it's taken multiple years. There's a certain point where you have to the thing isn't quite decorous for a podcast, but you need to basically do something.
I like that word, decorous. That's the first time that's been used.
You need to basically shit or get off the pot, man. That's the thing, and so they've brought multiple actions. They've initiated these investigations, and yet nothing has transpired yet. And this has been over years.
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration the other night about that. I'm not sure if either of you had a chance to see that, but I had to sit through it for professional reasons and covered it and wrote about it. But there was quite a ding-dong. And like Helen Dixon didn't just sit there taking it either. She swung back a few times.
Right.
And but there was a bit of a pile-on. I mean, Max Schrems is one of the most experienced campaigners, I suppose, in dealing with the Irish DPC, almost specifically on the issue of Facebook in regard to those interactions. But he was absolutely scathing. But in fairness, the DPC, her basic point was that under Irish law, under European law, And these things can take time. And if you speed them up too quickly, you leave the way open to appeals or reductions in fines, as have happened in other jurisdictions. Now, I'm paraphrasing her perspective because she's not here. There's nobody from the DPC here to put that point of view. I'm sure they would. But there was still, she really got it in the neck.
But I still feel like, 5 years, 4 or 5 years in the case of Schrems, 8 years, I think, between Schrems 1 and 2. That's, I understand taking your time and doing it right. Totally get it. And I expect as much. But there is a certain point, there is a point where you have to come up with a decision. You have to make a call. And she is the person, and the DPC is the regulator who's been tasked with making that call.
Yeah, and I think there are calls now already this week for that office to be expanded to 3 commissioners. I know it's something that some of the panelists, Dr. Johnny Ryan and Max Schrems, looked for the other night. I see a Green Party TD this week is echoing these calls. Anton, with regard to this case again, do you think it might set a precedent for other wider scraping issues? Facebook has referenced what happened to LinkedIn and Clubhouse. They're slightly different, but the principle is not a million miles away. Do you expect that it might set a slightly higher bar for the big tech companies and how they deal with your data?
Yeah, I think the signal is going to go out that this is more and more important, and it's going to be more and more of a, just a corporate priority that these things don't happen, because their fear as well, apart from the legal problems, is that people lose confidence in their services, that they don't believe in them anymore, or they're concerned about their private data, and they decide to leave the services or limit the information they're putting on them. Now, I would say that the prospect of private actions has also made a difference, because for these companies, remember, the maximum fine that can be imposed is 4% of global turnover, which is a lot.
I mean, that's an awful lot for a company like Facebook.
It's a lot for most companies, but for Facebook, where it has a margin of around 25%, so its profit is 25% of its revenue. It's a high margin business. If you lose 4%, it's bad, but it's not the end of the world.
Oh, no.
There's still a lot of margin left there. There's still a lot of the value left. But if you add on to that any follow-on actions that follow on from a decision of a data protection commission, or actions that come from scratch from users, the cost is starting to look really big, and this is something that has to be considered not as an afterthought, but at the heart of the design of these companies and the heart of how they're run.
Yeah. I'm fascinated to see what happens with this case. I think an awful lot of people will be. I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of interest in Europe as well. Do you have any indication about whether there's interest in this case across the EU?
So over time, the interest is certainly lifting in particularly in Germany and in Italy. There seems to be strong interest, and we're now getting at this stage, we're getting more interest from outside Ireland than inside Ireland. And one of our advantages in Ireland is that because Facebook is located here, complainants, people whose data subjects whose data has been breached can be part of this challenge. You don't necessarily have to be in Ireland to be part of this challenge.
Right. Okay. Well, look, I'm going to have to leave it there, but I'd thank you to both of you, Anton Loughnane, Director of Digital Rights Ireland, and Kerry Lenning, Associate in Data Protection and Information Security and Risk at Castlebridge. And that's all we have time for. From me, Adrian Weckler, Tech Editor of the Irish and Sunday Independent. I'll see you same time next week. Bye-bye.